So Magda Brazen Outlaw is currently sitting on an average win rate from 199 decks of 24.36, which makes her into the best mono-red commander, but also she's actually quite up there among the top performing commanders in general. For example, she's sitting on a higher win rate compared to Tivit, and just slightly below Kenrith, the Returned King. But let's begin by explaining how Magda actually wins and why she is having this huge potential. So if you have these 3 cards in play, you can have infinite tapped treasures and infinite Magda activations. So you have Metallic Mimic, that is a dwarf but also an artifact, and Clock of Omens. So if you activate Clock of Omens by tapping a Clock of Omens and Metallic Mimic, using Clock of Omens to target Metallic Mimic. This is going to first tap both of these 2 artifacts, generating an untapped treasure because of Magda, because of Metallic Mimic being a dwarf, and then Clock of Omens activated ability will resolve untapping Metallic Mimic. Now you have a Metallic Mimic and an untapped treasure. You use both again to tap them and target Metallic Mimic with Clock of Omens, untapping Metallic Mimic but also generating a secondary treasure. And henceforward you have infinite tapped treasures, and Magda doesn't require the artifacts that the treasures to be untapped, so she can sacrifice these tapped infinite treasures and still activate. From this point there are lots of different things that you can do. For example, you can find a Maskwood Nexus and Sorn. If Sorn is not something you can actually find, but with a Maskwood Nexus, Sorn becomes a dragon and now you can find it. This allows you to make 2 treasures each time you're doing this interaction, which means you're gonna generate 1 tapped treasures and 1 untapped treasure, which means you're going to generate infinite mana. So now you have both infinite Magda activations and infinite mana. Another option is to find Academy Manufacturer. So with this creature, whenever you generate a treasure with Magda, you're also generating a food and a clue. This means that instead of using, in this case, Universal Automaton, that is an artifact dwarf that is going to generate a treasure when it becomes tapped, that can also untap it with Clock of Omens, you can use the food token that you get from Academy Manufacturer to continue this loop. From this point, you have infinite treasures and infinite clues. This means that you can draw out your entire library, but also you have infinite mana and infinite Magda activations still. But you can also find Roaming Throne, that is also, by the way, a artifact dwarf. As Roaming Throne enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Roaming Throne is the chosen type in addition to its other types, so it's a dwarf. So whenever you tap Roaming Throne with Clock of Omens and to untap Roaming Throne, you generate a treasure. However, if a triggered ability of another creature you control of the chosen type triggers, it triggers an additional time. This means that, similar to Sorn, you're generating 2 treasures. So from here, similar to Sorn, you have infinite untapped treasures equal infinite mana, and still infinite tapped treasures into infinite Magda activations. Now, if you want a really clean and simple way to win from infinite mana once you have infinite treasures, here's Realm Scorch Hellkite. So it has a lot of abilities, but the one ability we really like is down there, 1 red and 1 generic. Realm Scorch Hellkite deals 1 damage to any target, so from here you have infinite damage. Simple. But there are more possible tricks. There you see a very strange artifact, Tel Gillad Stylus, I hope I pronounced that correct, for 1 mana, tap it, put target permanent you own on the bottom of your library, like this Hellkite. When this Hellkite enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage among any number of target creatures and or players. So it's an ETB deal 5 damage. And you can find this Bogardian Hellkite with Magda. So you find this and deal 5 damage, then you use that artifact to send that dragon back into your library, and you use the Clock of Omens and your infinite untapped treasures to untap that artifact. So you find the dragon again, you use the artifact to put it back into your library, and boom, you have infinite damage in instant speed. There is one worthy mention about dragons in general that is a good reason to actually include them inside your Magda build, because you have that Udawara Hellkite. Whenever a dragon you control's attack, create a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying. That's a very big and stompy dragon. You see Realm Scorcher Hellkite over there, that is still the outlet that we're gonna win with from the infinite mana. And then you have some utility dragons that sometimes aren't that hard to cast, for example, affinity for artifacts, and this spell costs S less to cast where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. So that Cavern Hoarder Dragon with haste, by the way, can actually attack and create a lot of treasures for you. If your opponents have too many artifacts, this could literally become something of a smaller version of Dockside Extortionist. And that dragon is a pretty cool card draw engine in a very strange artifact tribal build version. But there is a really big reason why I really want to highlight the dragon concept, that first of all, Magda can easily find these, and Magda will help you cast them by generating treasures if you actually draw into them. But Magda is also generating upgrades from various different artifacts, like Portal to Phyrexia, a 9 mana cost artifact that you're not really going to cast, but you could find it with your Magda if you need to. When Phyrexian Portal enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifice 3 creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, put the target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. It's a pretty good interaction versus your opponent, or well, it's a very expensive but pretty good interaction versus your opponent, but it's also a big value engine at the same time. Godfarer's Statue is also a pretty good stacks card in the current metagame. And Spinavisha is just a very bad in general cEDH spot removal, but Magda could basically activate and find it to spot remove a key thing that needs to be removed, so to say. So if we summarize pretty much everything here, we have a toolbox commander that can find specific things you need to find depending on what you're going up against. There's a lot of different potential artifacts that could be necessary for different situations. I mean, the One Ring has been a huge upgrade, and let's say someone board wipes and you have 5 treasures, you could activate Magda and find the One Ring to get you back into the game, because usually a board wipe is setting you back to the Stone Ages, and the One Ring is something to just help you get back into the game. But if someone has a Dockside Extortionist somewhere around the battlefield, which is pretty common, you can activate Magda and find Cursed Mirror in response to their potential Dockside Extortionist ETB trigger. And now you are going to generate treasures before they are generating treasures. And if you generate that magical 10, you can activate Magda twice to find an artifact dwarf and a Clock of Omens. And if you don't have that, if you already have an artifact dwarf, then you only need 5 treasures to win the game. So both, once again, toolbox for utility, but also a very fast and consistent path to win the match. You might say that 10 treasures or 5 treasures is pretty tricky, but in general it's not that hard to actually get there. You're playing a lot of dwarfs, which is giving you a very consistent, strong and fast opening hand. Also this commander just costs 2, so you get it into play fairly quickly in the match, and then you attack with a dwarf and you start building that treasure count. So you have a pretty fast, like you don't need much, you just need something around 5 treasures, an artifact dwarf and a Magda, and you can win the match. But also you have that really mid-rangely, really stompy, tons of different big dragons, and lots of different optional artifact dwarfs. And by the way, we have Urza's Saga as well, that is very good at finding that universal automaton that is an artifact dwarf. And dragons and artifacts in general are going to be printed more over time, which means that Magda is going to have her power level increase. She's going to get better and better, because artifacts is really common from Wizard of the Coast to print. And I can tell you this, that Magda's win rate have actually increased. If you actually look at that 0 plus 66, you can see that her win rate have been going up over time. And I think it's going to climb further up a little bit more over time as well. Because more artifact means she's going to be less commander dependent. It's a very focused commander-centric commander, but it could be more adaptive in the future potentially. Now let's look at some of these cards we've already showcased inside this video, but some more individual cards, and look at their potential different win rate. You see, we have a really big Magda sample size, and we can see how certain different individual cards perform on their own. So Begotten Hellkite is something of increasing the win rate by plus 0.9. It's pretty good. It has an inclusion rate of 25.1%. You can see the pie chart in green. It has a 25% basic inclusion rate. 50 decks, you can say play it, have included it. Winter Orb is a stacks piece that I think have dropped off quite a lot in general. I don't think it's that good. There's a lot of artifacts and Dockside Extortionist that is basically making it very easy to play around Winter Orb. So I would recommend not including it. I've usually seen it in other decks and it's usually not performing. Here we have a beautiful 50-50 split. Sphere of Resistance. I think it's good. It's a very good stacks card in the current meta. 99 decks are playing it. So yeah, basic 50-50 split. And it's having the exact same win rate as the total average of Magda in general. However, it actually increases the draw rate. If you see just above play it, you have average draw rate of 12.07 and it goes up to 13.33. Not that big deal, but still. Roaming Throne is a new card, and as you can see, it has really helped out a lot. It's basically been increasing the Magda win rate by plus 1.59. So here you see a very good example of how new printed cards are suddenly boosting Magda's potential win rate. Same with Portal to Phyrexia. It's seeing a very high inclusion rate, 90%. I guess those 10 were before this thing was printed, and it has increased the win rate by 0.76. It has a very high inclusion rate, so it's going to get an average win rate equal to the total average. The best thing we can see from a pie chart, if we want to actually analyze the performance of a card, is the 50-50 split. For example, Clock of Omens has a 99, basically 100% inclusion rate, so we don't see a big difference. But if you see something being basically heavily played by 197 decks, it's an auto-include more or less. I thought Goldspan Dragon was going to be good inside Magda, but apparently it's not showcasing a great performance. This is another dragon that is also not showcasing a great performance. At the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. I mean, if you attack... Nah, it's not... Yeah, I don't see this working out for Magda in general. I have seen a few Magda builds that play Reckless Fireweaver, and sure, I can see the appeal, because once you have Maskwood Nexus, you can find this and put it into play, and then keep generating infinite treasures. And from that you have infinite damage. But it's a pretty bad card in general. It doesn't do that much. Like, sure, when you have Magda and this in play, you attack and create treasures with a few dwarves. It's going to do something, but in general, it's just a group slug card that doesn't do anything. So I think it's trying to... There are better outlets once you have the combo assembled. This is the finisher, but I think apparently this is a worse finisher. Even though I personally think that this is a better finisher, but there are different options. This Realm Scorch Hellkite was just something I showcased. In the end, you can win the game with Magda in lots of different clean ways. This is actually showcasing it's minus 0.18. So in the end, it's basically the exact same identical win rate as the total average. And you have something like a 30% inclusion rate on this thing. Torpor Orb, here we have the beautiful 50-50 split. And it's making the win rate go down by 1.14. I can see why you wouldn't normally include this, because you want to have the ability to generate a lot of treasures with your Dockside Extortionist. Now you might say, oh, that's just one card inside your entire library. We could live without that, but you are going to be playing Cursed Mirror. As you can see here, it's close to an auto-include, and whenever an opponent has a Dockside on the battlefield, you can find your Cursed Mirror with your Magda and have your Dockside. So you have a pretty likelihood of having an ETB effect for you. On the other hand, you have to have that 5 treasures to be able to find Cursed Mirror, so that could be a reason why Torpor could be good, maybe, because in the end the situation isn't 100% guaranteed to always come up. Twin Shot Sniper, this is another way to generate infinite damage post generating infinite Magda activations, because when Twin Shot Sniper enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. And you're using that artifact that I showcased earlier for just 1 mana to shuffle it back or put it in the bottom of your library, and then you can activate Magda again, find this again, and have infinite damage. But still, as you can see, it has a pretty clean average win rate compared to the total average. But it's a way to win the game with infinite Magda activations. It's also a pretty okay interaction from your hand. Channel, discard twin shot sniper, deal 2 damage to any target. So it's not a dead card. And I could see this being a little bit of a dead card. I mean, if you get it into play with your Magda activation and you have a lot of mana, you're not really able to win the game, but you could sit here and just do lots of stuff. For example, let's say you have 5 treasures, someone puts an opposition agent on the stack, you can find Realm Scorch Hellkite, and then opposition agent resolves, and then you go to your turn and you blow up that opposition agent. So I can see a world where this would be good. But still, it is 6 mana, and I think that is the big reason, like, big expensive casual dragon in the end is gonna make the win rate go down a tiny bit. Stranglehold is sitting on a very bad win rate, very low inclusion rate, so people are opting away from it. Now, when you have a really low sample size, like only 20, it's kind of hard to say if the win rate is actually accurate, but as you can see, a lot of people aren't choosing to play this as well, and that's an indication that people are using their player experience and choosing not to play it, indicating that it might also be bad. No, I thought this dragon was so cool, affinity for artifacts. I did showcase this earlier. This has a pretty awesome attack card draw effect. Honestly, this would be a very cool casual commander. I think I wanna build this, but it's not good. If I play casual, I might put this one together actually if I get my hands on it. But regardless, it's not showcasing a good performance inside your 99. You have 50 decks that have played it, so you have an inclusion rate of 25%. But it is making the win rate go down by 1.69%. So it looks like it's not dropping by a huge amount, but still it's something to... And there are probably better cards instead of this, depending on, but everything is also meta dependent. Everything we're basically looking at are from broad, open, webcam and paper tournaments, and the meta could be shifting a lot around those. But if you're playing at the same local game store every single time and you have a very specific meta, this could be good for you. So don't just look at the stats and such, and take a look at them, try to understand them, think about them, and then use your own analysis and what you think is needed for your specific metagame as well. Goblin Engineer. This is actually a pretty good card. So it can search out Cloudstone Curios in general, but you can also use them to find defense grid, and then you can use these goblins to reanimate those artifacts, and there are situations where Clock of Omens and your very key artifacts gets destroyed, and these goblins could be good to just bring them back into action. By the way, Magda finding defense grid, pro tip. And as you can see, it has a pretty high inclusion rate of 34.7, and the win rate is going up a tiny bit from including it. Elixir of Immortality. So this is the old way of generating a loop, as this is allowing you to shuffle back your graveyard into your library. So if you remember, I talked about Academy Manufacturer generating infinite draws, because you're generating infinite clues, so you can draw out your entire library. This means that you can find, let's say, Lightning Bolt, eventually drawing into Lightning Bolt, cast Lightning Bolt, and a few other spells here and there. And then you use Elixir of Immortality to shuffle everything back into your library. Then you're using Magda to find Elixir of Immortality, and then you're using your infinite clues to draw into Lightning Bolt, creating that potential loop. But this is an old trick, and there have been upgrades, so in general I think Power Creep have started to replace Elixir of Immortality, but it's still an option that you could utilize if you want to have that kind of strange loop post generating infinite treasures. Ancient Copper Dragon is an awesome card for Magda. So once again, you need something of 10 treasures to win the game with your Magda. If you have 5, you can't, which means that you can find Ancient Copper Dragon in your last opponent's end step. Use this, go to combat, flip that d20, and if you roll higher than 10, you actually can roll like 8, because you're also gonna have Magda and Dwarves to generate treasures for you. But with that, you're probably gonna get the maximum count of 10, and from that point you should have the victory. It has a 19.1 inclusion rate and an increase on the win rate by plus 1.22. So it seems to be a kind of decent card. Academy Manufacturer, showcasing a good result. Like if you have an opposition agent in play, with Magda and Academy Manufacturer, you're getting card draw. You're also getting a lot of food tokens, you're also feeding a lot of docksides, but you're still having a pathway digging forward. So it's both a potential like finisher helping you establish a victory from your Magda combo, but also being a value engine and a dockside feeder. This does not surprise me. So you have a 70% inclusion rate on Blood Moon. 141 decks have included it. It's not an auto-include in other words, and as you can see, the win rate is dropping by 1.23. And the answer is pretty simple. In general, Blood Moon is not really affecting the current cEDH metagame that much. I mean, Dockside Extortionist is red, and it generates all the mana you need in various colors to solve all of your problems. There are gonna be a few opponents that are gonna be shut down by this, but in general you're usually gonna have more opponents that don't care. Artifacts, mana dorks also go past this pretty easily. Yes, you will hurt all their non-basic lands, but people in these days are usually fine with that. So I personally think that Blood Moon in general is not a recommended card because of meta reasons. And the same thing should be said about Magus of the Moon. This surprised me a tiny bit. Mox Amber, it's not an auto-include, but it's a pretty high inclusion rate here. And it's actually dropping the win rate by a tiny amount, 0.79, which is not much. So it doesn't have a huge impact in general to the total performance. But I kinda understand thinking about it a tiny bit. You don't need lots of mana, you need treasures. Treasures equals win. Mana equals casting those expensive spells you rather tutor for if you accidentally have them in your hand. It's not a bad card, but it looks like you're playing fine without it. Oh wow, Spine of Shai is actually showcasing a great performance. Or well, it has 61.3 inclusion rate, which is quite a lot. It's more than 50%, but it's still kind of on that 50-50 split. And it's increasing the win rate by 2.47. That is a good increase, honestly. That is, by the way, the same win rate as Tumna and Krom. So apparently the ability to be able to destroy anything in instant speed by simply sacrificing 5 treasures and finding this thing seems to be a good idea. In other words, this looks like a very recommended card in general for Magda. Wow, this actually had a huge impact too. So one of the big reasons you actually play Trinsphere is that there's a loop with, what is the artifact name? Memory Jar, where you use Memory Jar and Elixir of Immortality to deck all of your opponents. And in that process they might be drawing cards, so you can use Trinsphere to make sure that they can't cast their spells. Also, Trinsphere is a pretty good stacks piece in the current metagame, locking down your opponents from casting spells. It's actually very similar to that Sphere of Resistance. This is like a bigger version of it. This is something Magda can tutor for if you need to. Because remember this, if you have 5 treasures and you're going to generate another batch of 5 treasures next turn, if people understand Magda, they will view you as a threat. So there's a chance you will get interacted with in the form of board wipe if you pass turn, keeping your 5 treasures active. So you could sacrifice all your 5 treasures to find Trinsphere to remove the threat from you, but also interacting with everyone around the board state. What this is going to do is change people's priority. Instead of board wiping you, they're trying to solve the Trinsphere instead, and that's better for you kinda in general. Also, heavily interacting with this is tricky for opponents. It's just making your opponents play very sluggishly. So we have 32.2% including Trinsphere, a total amount of 64 decks, and they have increased their win rate to 27.70, an increase by 3.34. That's good. Looks like a recommended card in general for Magda in this case. I hope this video gave you some insights in how to potentially build Magda. But also, if you're playing against Magda, I hope it gave you some insights in how she operates. It is one of those just perfect commander examples where you have both a consistent fast potential combo victory option as well as being able to deviate towards other venues. You can pivot easily, find value engines, find stompy dragons, find really big cool artifacts, and that's a very cool thing because it gives you that cEDH potential deck, but also that casual feeling if you want to build or play a very competitive cEDH build, but still have that casual dragon stompy thing and those very big artifact feelings in that you have in casual. This is the commander for you. The only problem she basically needs to solve is being mono red and a little bit commander dependent, but that is something that could change over time as Wizards of the Coast once again are probably gonna be printing more dragons and artifacts in the future.